The Giggling Granny, a smile that hid darkness. Her victims called her Grandma, her neighbors called her Sweet, but history remembers her as Nannie Doss. The Giggling Granny. With a smile on her lips and arsenic in her hands, she became one of the most unsuspecting killers in American history. But why did she do it? Was it for love, money, or simply the thrill? To uncover the truth, we must go back to the beginning, to where the laughter began. Nannie Hazel was born on November 4th, 1905, in Blue Mountain, Alabama. Her childhood was far from the cozy, loving environment one might expect. Her father, James, was a tyrant, a man who ruled his family with an iron fist. He forbade laughter, punished curiosity, and turned their home into a prison. And Nannie? She was his favorite target. At just 7 years old, Nannie suffered a life-altering head injury when she fell off a swing. The injury left her with debilitating migraines and a growing sense of detachment from reality. Some say it was this moment that planted the seeds of darkness in her mind. Others blamed the crushing poverty and isolation that marked her childhood. But one thing is certain, Nannie grew up desperate for love and control, two things she'd find in the most horrifying ways. At 16, Nannie thought she'd found her escape: marriage. She tied the knot with Charlie Braggs, a shy, unassuming man who worked at a local factory. But instead of love, their marriage brought nothing but misery. Charlie's mother was domineering and cruel, treating Nannie like a servant. And Charlie? He turned a blind eye. Over the next few years, Nannie gave birth to 4 daughters. But the pressures of motherhood and a failing marriage weighed heavily on her. In 1927, tragedy struck, or so it seemed. 2 of Nannie's children suddenly fell ill and died. Doctors called it food poisoning, but Charlie wasn't convinced. Terrified of his wife's dark moods, he packed up and fled, leaving Nannie and their surviving children behind. Charlie would later claim he left because he feared for his life. Perhaps he was right. For Nannie, marriage wasn't just a union. It was a hunting ground. Over the next 30 years, she married and murdered 4 more husbands. Each one met their end after mysteriously falling ill. Heart attacks, stomach pains, sudden collapses. But behind the symptoms was a sinister truth: arsenic poisoning. Her second husband, Robert Franklin Harrelson, was a heavy drinker with a violent temper. Nannie endured his abuse for years, but one day she had enough. She laced his whiskey with rat poison, and within hours he was dead. Her reaction? Laughter. When questioned, she claimed his death was a tragic accident, and the authorities believed her. Why wouldn't they? Nannie was a sweet, church-going woman who baked pies for her neighbors and adored her grandchildren. The idea of her as a killer was unthinkable. Nannie's motives were as varied as her methods. Sometimes she killed for money, collecting insurance payouts that allowed her to live comfortably. Other times it was revenge, punishment for infidelity, cruelty, or simply boredom. But most chilling of all, some murders seemed to serve no purpose at all. She killed simply because she could. Her third husband, Arlie Lanning, died after a short illness. Her fourth, Richard Morton, was poisoned just months after they married. And her fifth, Samuel Doss, a church deacon who disapproved of her love for romance novels, met his end after eating one of her special dinners. Samuel's death was the one that finally unraveled her web of lies. When Samuel Doss died, his doctor grew suspicious and ordered an autopsy. The results were shocking. Samuel's body contained enough arsenic to kill a horse. Nannie was arrested, and during her interrogation, she confessed to killing 11 people, including her own mother, 2 of her children, and her grandchildren. Her chilling trademark, giggling as she recounted each murder. "Yes, I killed him," she said. "He was boring." Nannie Doss was sentenced to life in prison, where she spent her final years. She died of leukemia in 1965, taking her secrets and her laughter with her. But her story didn't end there. For decades, her crimes have fascinated and horrified true crime enthusiasts, raising chilling questions about the evil that can lurk behind the sweetest smile. They called her the Giggling Granny, but her victims called her something else: deadly. What do you think drove Nannie Doss to commit such horrifying acts? Let us know in the comments below. The Hidden Heir. The Giggling Granny's dark legacy. Her victims called her Grandma, her neighbors called her Sweet, but history remembers her as Nannie Doss, the Giggling Granny. With a smile on her lips and arsenic in her hands, she became one of the most unsuspecting killers in American history. But why did she do it? Was it for love, money, or simply the thrill? To uncover the truth, we must go back to the beginning, to where the laughter began. Emily Doss was born in 1981 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the same city where Nannie Doss committed some of her infamous murders. Her childhood wasn't marked by violence or abuse. On the surface, she lived an ordinary life, but Emily was far from ordinary. From a young age, she was fascinated by death, often reading about unsolved crimes and devouring stories about her family's infamous ancestor. When Emily discovered her great-grandmother's diary at 18, she became obsessed. Nannie's words described murder not as a crime, but as an art, a way to escape, to control, to thrive. For Emily, it was a revelation. She didn't just admire Nannie, she wanted to surpass her. By the early 2000s, Emily had adopted a dangerous double life. By day, she was a waitress at a local diner. By night, she was a sex worker, using her charm to lure unsuspecting men. It was in this world that Emily committed her first murder. Her first victim was a traveling salesman named Henry Watts. After a brief encounter, Emily stabbed him repeatedly in the chest, later claiming that his screams were music to her ears. But she didn't stop there. Emily carefully cleaned the room, wiped down every surface, and staged the chapter to look like a robbery gone wrong. When police found Henry's body, they assumed it was just another tragic crime in a dangerous neighborhood. Emily's first kill wasn't just an act of violence, it was a test. And when she got away with it, she knew she was ready for more. For the next 2 years, Emily perfected her methods. Like her great-grandmother, she targeted people who wouldn't be missed. Men with no families, drifters, and criminals. But unlike Nannie, Emily didn't use poison. Her weapon of choice was her body. She lured men with promises of intimacy and left them dead in alleys, motels, and abandoned buildings. Some of her victims' deaths were overshadowed by the chaos of the time. The events of 9/11 dominated the headlines, leaving little room for stories about a few dead men in small towns. And for Emily, the lack of attention only emboldened her. Henry Watts was only the beginning. His murder was brutal, but it was also strategic. Emily knew he was alone and far from home, making him the perfect target. His death became her blueprint. Emily's second high-profile victim was a man who should have known better, Detective Mark Hayes. Hayes had been working on a string of unsolved murders when he met Emily at a local bar. Within hours, he was dead, his body found in his car outside the bar. The cause? A fatal stab wound to the neck. Hayes' death sent shockwaves through the police department, but Emily left no evidence behind. She reveled in the irony of killing the man who was hunting her. Perhaps Emily's most shocking victim was Senator John Prescott, a married politician with a reputation for corruption. Prescott's death was officially ruled a heart attack, but rumors swirled about a young woman seen leaving his room that night. Emily never confirmed or denied her involvement, but her diary hinted at her involvement with a man of power who liked to play games. In 2003, Emily's reign of terror came to an end. A surviving victim managed to escape and identify her, leading to her arrest. But when police searched her home, they found something far more disturbing. A shrine to Nannie Doss, complete with photos, clippings, and a chilling note that read, "She walked so I could run." Emily confessed to 11 murders, but hinted that there were more important people she would never name. Her trial was held behind closed doors, and her records were sealed, leaving the public in the dark. To this day, her true body count remains a mystery. From Nannie Doss to Emily Doss, one thing is clear: evil runs in the blood. But where Nannie left behind laughter, Emily left behind silence. A chilling reminder that some stories will never be fully told. What do you think drove Emily to follow in her great-grandmother's footsteps? Was it nature, nurture, or something even darker? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of true crime and fiction.